Today, we will continue the discussion on the visualization practice of compassion and bodhicitta. This is the second lesson. The first lesson was given at the previous Buddhist assembly. The visualization practice will be formally introduced during today's session. Before that, we'll have a recap to refresh your memory. When it comes to compassion and bodhicitta, we must practice visualization. If we don't, we cannot even reach the Pure Land of Buddha, not mention attaining Buddhahood. But how do we practice? In fact, compassion can be separated into two parts. One is mercy, and the other is pity. Pity means alleviating sufferings. When you see people suffering, you must find ways of easing or even remove their sufferings. As this is our innate conscience, many people are born with it. Only a small number of people lost it after many births, deaths and rebirths in the cycle of karmic existence, or samsara. As they already forget their bodhicitta and compassion, and thus they have no such conscience at birth. But most people still have it. What is mercy, exactly? It is to give happiness to others. Only a small number of people are born with it. Most people learn sharing and how to share their belongings through education, and they understand gradually the need to make others happy. You'll discover that in terms of ranking, pity comes first. Perhaps we are able to regain it in a shorter period of time after practicing. Mercy comes the second, as probably we need to be educated, and also it takes longer to recover. What is bodhicitta, then? Many misunderstand the true bodhicitta as mercy and pity, or compassion. It is not. In fact, it is a kind of awareness, a kind of Buddha nature, and the perfect enlightenment when one attains Buddhahood in the future. Just like the awareness of the perfect enlightenment that Sakyamuni Buddha has restored. And this is bodhicitta. We need to restore bodhicitta in order to become a Buddha. However, many people don't understand how we can restore the awareness. What kind of awareness represents the perfect enlightenment? Perfect enlightenment means an awareness that is 100% absolutely no deviation and completely correct. Because the concept is very difficult to comprehend, so maybe under the Buddha's guidance. Many bodhisattvas in their practices separate bodhicitta into two parts. One is called relative bodhicitta, and the other is absolute bodhicitta. The purpose is to serve as a stepping stone for sentient beings to practice step by step, and eventually achieve the perfect enlightenment. Nonetheless, if the practice is not successful all at once, can the practitioner do it slowly? Therefore, they think how we can slowly practice bodhicitta in this ordinary world. So they further divide relative bodhicitta into two parts. The reason for the separation was explained in the previous session. One is bodhicitta in aspiration, and the other is called bodhicitta in action. It means that if sentient beings are willing to take a vow, they will rejoice at the common vision of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and easily resonate with them. All Buddhas and Bodhisattvas thus can communicate and help them easily. Making a vow is very simple, but what is its connotation? There is a rule. What is your purpose for making the vow to restore your bodhicitta? Do you try to liberate yourself from the cycle of the karmic existence, from continuous restraints and sufferings, or you also want to help others? If your vow is to help all other sentient beings, then you could truly achieve bodhicitta in aspiration. In fact, as recorded in the Buddhist sutras, many people started by making a vow and later went smoothly to become a Buddha. All because they took the vow of bodhicitta in aspiration, very thoroughly and sincerely. As such, the hindrance on their paths of Dharma practice had been greatly reduced. And they also got help from many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Therefore, bodhicitta in aspiration is a very important part, and thus it becomes the first step in practicing bodhicitta. The second one is bodhicitta in action. As we have already made vows, and so we must carry out the vows. Otherwise, the vow is simply a lie. Then, what must be done to implement bodhicitta in action? There are two things to do. First, receiving the bodhisattva precepts. Some people say that it is very difficult to observe the bodhisattva precepts. They think the observance of bodhisattva precepts is to give everything, even your head or feet. If people ask those from you, this is a misunderstanding. It is wrong, because absolute bodhicitta, which will be discussed later and is highlighted in red, should be practiced together with precepts, meditative concentration and wisdom. Among the three disciplines, wisdom is ranked the highest. Many people observe the precepts. Regardless they practice the small vehicle or the great vehicle. You may note that some people can easily observe the precepts. They firmly adhere to any precept they receive. In terms of meditative concentration, they can sit in a cave for several years without any problem. But when it comes to wisdom, many people have problems. Some people get stuck, cannot develop wisdom, such that they cannot distinguish what should be done from what they shouldn't. They are unable to make choices in some very complicated gray areas. Because of their incompetence of solving these problems, many fail in the practice of the bodhicitta in action. Nevertheless, how can we achieve bodhicitta in action? Apart from receiving the bodhisattva precepts, there is one more thing to do. All your actions must benefit oneself and also benefit others, and should be balanced. Benefiting oneself means to benefit yourself, while benefiting others means to benefit others. If someone asks for your head, would you give it to him? So, if you have wisdom, and you only do things that benefit oneself and also benefit others, otherwise you won't do it. Then, you already know that you cannot give your head to him. Why? If you give your head to him, your life will be ended. You won't be able to continue practicing Dharma, but be subject to take rebirth again, unless you're 8th ground Bodhisattva, Akala Boom Bodhisattva, or above. What is the 8th ground? It's like taking a piano exam. And level 8 is the highest. 1st ground, 2nd ground, up to the 10th ground, are the stages of our practice. The 8th ground means the practitioner has reached a certain level, and is characterized as no turning back, where he will not backslide in his progress. Even after taking rebirth in samsara, he will still remember the Buddhist Dharma and continue to practice. He will not remember nothing, even if he forgets at birth. His memory will return quickly after he grows up and continue to practice Dharma. This is the 8th ground Bodhisattva. Unless you are the 8th ground Bodhisattva, with such a high and stable achievement. Otherwise, when you submit your head to others and reincarnate, there may be some evil karma dragging you down into the realm of animals, or the realm of hells. In fact, under the circumstances, you will neither be able to continue to practice nor remember your previous practice level for a long time. Therefore, you will waste the past progress, stifle your practice and even extinguish your wisdom life. Therefore, one shall never do so. Why are some people afraid of receiving bodhisattva precepts? It's because they haven't made use of their wisdom. In other words, no one has really explained in detail how to observe the bodhisattva precepts with wisdom. They don't understand because no one has specifically explained to them. Since you have listened to my explanation today, so you should remember to use your wisdom. Receiving the bodhisattva precepts doesn't mean that you give whatever people ask you for. You only give them when you can strike the balance of benefiting oneself and also benefiting others. You can implement Bodhicitta in action if you have received the Bodhisattva precepts and can use wisdom to achieve a win-win situation that benefits yourself and others. But doing the third and fourth aren't enough. In fact, our goal is to undertake the fifth one, that is, the Absolute Bodhicitta. Absolute is the most extraordinary, means the most thorough and deepest Bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is the Buddha nature when we accomplish Buddhahood, which is the Buddha nature of perfect enlightenment, and this is absolute Bodhicitta. It requires one to complement with precepts, meditative concentration and wisdom, so as to enable one to enter the balanced middle way. What is the middle way? It means no deviation, no attachment, and in the state of emptiness. Neither existence nor voidness as well. It brings about a crystal clarity awareness, which is the perfect enlightenment. In fact, neither existence nor voidness is the state of oneness. You may enter this state through the practice of emptiness and restore the perfect enlightenment, a 100% absolute correct realizing and knowing without any deviation. Such crystal clarity awareness is Bodhicitta. It means that you have already attained Buddhahood and you can enter the Dharma realm, stay there and never fall back to the cycle of karmic existence. Unless you want to go back to the three realms to save sentient beings. As you know and master the ways of entering the state of oneness of the perfect enlightenment, therefore, even though you want to enter the three realms to save sentient beings, and you are still subject to the sufferings of the cycle of the karmic existence, just like Buddha Shakyamuni. After attaining Buddhahood, he still suffered from the karmic retributions in the events of consuming horse food for 3 months, having headaches for 3 days, being chased by a thorn and having blood in stool after eating his disciple's poisonous mushroom. However, when the life of his physical body ended and left this world, he could easily enter the state of oneness and enter the Dharma realm. Formal lie got liberated from the bondages of the cycle of karmic existence. Therefore, becoming a Buddha means the restoration of the crystal clarity awareness, which is the fifth step, the final goal we aim to achieve. But you have to remember, as someone may ask, can we practice Bodhicitta directly without practicing compassion? Remember, as I said last time, that in case you fail after entering the Dharma realm, you fall back out and continue to take rebirth at the cycle of the karmic existence. As such, can you enter the Buddha's Pure Lands? In fact, whether you can enter the Buddha's Pure Lands depends on whether you have accumulated virtuous merits in this and numerous past lifetimes, and whether you have aroused compassion. If you don't have any training to arouse compassion, have not helped others to remove suffering, and have not given happiness to others, then you cannot even get to the Buddha's Pure Lands. We'll teach you later a visualization practice that can help you make up the deficiency in this aspect. Even though you have not practiced this in many past lifetimes, but after our teaching, you will know how to replenish this shortcoming. As a result, you must practice compassion. So, isn't it true that we should practice the first to the fourth step? Yes, we should. In addition, if you do not practice Bodhicitta, you cannot become a Buddha. As you do not regain the awareness, you would definitely not be able to attain Buddhahood. However, would there be a problem if you practice from the first to the fifth step? If you practice slowly from the first to the fourth step, how long do you think it will take? It is about 2 to 3 great Asamkhya Kalpas. What is a Asamkhya Kalpa? What are 2 to 3 great Asamkhya Kalpas? Now I'll explain. Kalpa does not mean robbery or calamity in Chinese pronunciation, but it means a period of time. How do we calculate it? There is a minor kalpa, which indicates the time a universe goes through formation, persistence, disintegration, annihilation. Formation means to form a universe. It's hard enough to form an Earth, not mention a universe. There are so many stuffs in the galaxy, so the formation of the whole universe must take a long time. A minor kalpa also includes the stage of persistence, where it stays there to continue to run for a long time, plus the time taken for their universe to deteriorate, and disintegration, which is the time for the whole universe to explode. And then the time of annihilation, when there's nothing left. The long time to go through all the stages is just a minor kalpa. 20 minor kalpas is a medium kalpa. You can imagine it a very long time. 4 medium kalpas is a great kalpa. So how many great kalpas is a great Asamkhaya kalpa? It is 10 to the power 51 times of the time required for the universe to go through formation, persistence, disintegration, annihilation. Imagine, if you don't practice Dharma, or rely on some slow methods by only chanting Buddha Amitabha's holy name. In fact, if you rely solely on the sound of the Buddha's holy name to get help, then it will take you 3 great Asamkhaya kalpas. If you practice compassion and relative bodhicitta slowly, it will take you 2 to 3 Asamkhaya kalpas to practice the 4 steps, such that you could improve your mind nature to the state where you understand how to visualize emptiness and to restore the perfect enlightenment. Indeed, it requires such a long time. It may not bother you. You might think that I know how to recite the holy name of Buddha Amitabha, so after I arrive at Buddha's Pure Land, I can practice Dharma slowly under its protection. Of course, this is an ideal thinking, but the reality doesn't work in this way. You will understand after listen to my explanation, and the fact that during the 2 to 3 great Asamkhaya kalpas, which is a very long period of time, we will have to continue to have countless births, deaths, rebirths in the samsara, and under the torture of sufferings for such a long period of time. We will eventually collapse, easily fall into some traps because of other temptations, and we will violate precepts, have no compassion, and also use up all the virtuous rewards accumulated. Then, what would happen in the end? You will have a good chance of being trapped in the realm of hungry ghosts, realm of animals, and realm of hells, which means that you can never return to the realm of human or heavenly realm, and even can never practice Dharma to enable you to liberate from the cycle of the karmic existence. Hence, we have been born as human in this life, and even have the opportunity to hear Dharma, and also know how the entire Nata works, and understand its dangers and horrors. As such, we must make up our mind to practice Dharma and attain the accomplishment in this life. So, we should not practice slowly by reciting Namo Amitabha Buddha and take 3 great Asamkhaya kalpas to practice from the 1st to the 4th step one by one. It really will not work. Actually, Buddha Sakyamuni once described his own journey of attaining Buddhahood. He said he also experienced the 3 great Asamkhaya kalpas. But since he was so sincere that no one could compare with him, so he was able to keep going and went through the 3 great Asamkhaya kalpas smoothly. However, most sentient beings would just give up before finishing the 3 great Asamkhaya kalpas. Hence, it could be said that Sakyamuni Buddha was the only one among trillions of sentient beings who could finish the journey smoothly. Therefore, we should be careful not to use overly simple and indirect methods. The 3 great Asamkhaya kalpas are an unknown long period of time, and each universe also takes different time to go through the stage of formation, persistence, disintegration, annihilation. Because of this indefinite long time, Some people suggest not to practice the first to the fourth steps because they will take 2 to 3 asamhaya kalpas to practice, so they suggest to go straight to the fifth. The fifth step is the most extraordinary and the true awareness of Bodhisattva, where we practice awareness directly. Esoteric Buddhism, or Vajrayana, says one could attaining Buddhahood in this life, where it teaches the awareness of emptiness, which is all we need in the practice. But don't forget you must also work with precepts, meditative concentration and wisdom. Many people consider emptiness as everything being empty. So, there is no need to observe precepts. No need to have meditative concentration, as one can enter emptiness directly, and there is also no need to use wisdom. They thought that there is nothing when we enter emptiness. As what the Heart Sutra says, no wisdom and no attainment. Therefore, we don't need precepts, meditative concentration and wisdom, but practicing and enter emptiness directly, as it would be fast and straightforward. In fact, many sentient beings don't even understand the true meaning of emptiness, and as they also abandon precepts, meditative concentration and wisdom. And therefore many of them will definitely fail. They don't practice the first to the fourth steps and are also unsuccessful in the fifth, and thus they will fail. Hence, many sentient beings will fail, as they don't practice the first to the fourth, and they are also fail in the fifth, so that they are not able to attain accomplishment. As a result, many of them even fail to reach the Pure Land, and also have no hope to attain Buddhahood, and thus they fall into a bad place as the evil karma takes. So, in order to be safe and secure, we must remember, for all our Dharma practice, the visualization practice must contain all the contents from the first to the fifth step. Such Dharma practice is the best. Therefore, when you have a chance to seek Dharma practice in the future, and you find a guru carelessly, and when he teaches you how to practice Dharma, then how can you know whether his method is complete, or whether his method is too slow? For example, for the first to the fifth step, would it be possible that the guru's teaching misses the second or the fourth step, such that it would slow down the progress? You should judge like this: does his visualization practice contain all elements from the first to the fourth step, and then escalate to the fifth step? The element of emptiness, therefore, the visualization practice we are teaching now is covering all the 5 steps, so it is a practice with insurance. We should not learn to run before we have even learned to walk, and thus we must not practice awareness directly. So, how do we visualize for this visualization practice method? I'll explain this now. We carry out the visualize practice during 3 periods within the 24 hours of the day. The first period is when you've just waken up, or the moment you settle in or emerge from meditative concentration, or when you have a certain vision in a meditation, or after you die. If it's after death, then when can you enter the Dharma realm? As the crystal clarity, awareness, appears out of a sudden, and the Dharma nature suddenly appears. And that is the moment that enable you to enter the Dharma realm. You can watch a video lecture on the Dajom Buddhist Association's TV channel on YouTube called The Profound Meaning of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Episode 1, How to Face the Death Crisis. It mentions that after we die, we fall into a state of coma. But at the moment when we wake up from the coma, suddenly our own crystal clarity, awareness, our Dharma nature, appears. In fact, this phenomenon may also appear during our sleep or at the moment when we wake up from sleep. However, if you have not been trained or haven't listened to our explanation in this lesson, you would not know there's such an opportunity. Actually, when one state is transforming to another state, where the difference between the 2 states is quite significant, Like one is sleep and the other is waking up, as both states are quite different, so it would be extremely unstable within the transition. At this mostly unstable state, our Dharma nature is most likely to appear. As such, we have to do this training. So, the moment we wake up from sleep, or the moment we come out from meditative concentration, or when you've entered a very deep meditation, as if a glass of muddy water precipitates slowly back to clear. Then you suddenly come out from the concentration and enter another state, as if a clear glass of water is stirred and becomes muddy again. The moment of transition gives opportunities for Dharma nature to appear. In addition, in the middle of a meditation, when we concentrate stably, we may suddenly enter a state where the Dharma nature emerges. The meditative state that enables you to enter the Dharma nature is a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity. That's why so many Dharma practitioners who, in order to conduct a retreat, go into remote snow-capped mountains for decades, keep sitting and won't return to the vulgar world, even if they are asked. They won't return until one day, like Buddha Shakyamuni. They can successfully enter that meditative concentration that enabled them to enter the Dharma realm, so that they know what the state of oneness is. When they grasp what the state of oneness is, they would keep training themselves forever so as to enable them to enter the state of oneness at will. This is the reason why before the day that they are able to master such method that enable them to enter the state of oneness, they won't leave the retreat but carry on practicing. Because this state is more likely to occur in a meditative state. While for the fourth state, as I said earlier, that every person will have 1 to 2 opportunities to have such state to appear when one dies. If you'd like to know when the opportunities arise, you can watch the video mentioned earlier, The Profound Meaning of Tibetan Book of the Death, Episode 1, and pay attention to the discussion of appearance, increase, attainment, radiance, stages. When you go into a coma and then into the darkness, and then the light appears when you wake up, which is the manifestation of the radiance of the intrinsic nature that I mentioned before. It is very important, as it means that during these 4 transitional periods, there is a kind of state will manifest at any time, which is the Dharma realm, where the state of oneness appears. What is Dharma realm? We have already discussed it in the last session. It's your Dharma nature, or Buddha nature, or the perfect enlightenment. It can also be explained as the crystal clarity, awareness of Bodhisattva, the awareness of the perfect enlightenment, which is called Dharma nature. Dharma nature is all-pervasive and being everywhere, and that the realm where the Dharma nature is all-pervasive is called the Dharma realm, where the realm belongs to the state of oneness. This is how we could truly liberate from the cycle of karmic existence, and restore our great ability, and also this kind of Dharma bliss. Indeed, the bliss of the Dharma realm is where the happiness, or blissfulness, is beyond words, exceeding infinite times of any pleasure existed in the human world. If you heard from the description of Buddha Shakyamuni and those who have entered the Dharma realm, you would know that this is the truly eternal happiness, or blissfulness. All the worldly happiness is not eternal, and also would subject to the sufferings of samsara. Only if one is able to enter the Dharma realm and stay there, then one could truly have the real happiness, or blissfulness. That is, we are very likely to suddenly enter the Dharma realm during these 4 time periods. There are many people who entered the Dharma realm, but they didn't know, and thus fell back out. Indeed, how can we enter? Please refer to the article in Lake of Lotus, issue 20. The meaning of near-death experiences, which describes the status of the appearance of the light after death. You may read it again, but you don't actually need to read it, as you wouldn't know how to practice, because the article didn't tell you how to practice. So, I will teach you now the visualization practice, and thus you know how to practice. One thing we need to do is to initiate the program of entering the Dharma realm. In fact, we should have an initiation program, and I'll teach you in a moment. If you do not initiate the program of entering the Dharma realm, you would skip it in a very short period of time, that is, less than 1/20th of a second. You don't even know it has already manifested, but then it has already vanished. Hence, you would not be able to enter the Dharma realm. Even if you could enter the Dharma realm, however, if you haven't initiated the program, then you would quickly fall back out in less than a second. Therefore, the initiation program of entering the Dharma realm that I am teaching you today is an extremely important practice method, which has never been transmitted. Not to mention that it could be openly transmitted. Thus, you should cherish this practice method, which will be explained later in greater detail. On the other hand, the second period is during our daily life and in dreams. During dreams, if one's level of practice is high, then when one is in one's dream, it is actually equivalent to when one is at one's meditative state. So, in this case, that doesn't count as daily life for this kind of practice. However, as we're ordinary people, that is, 99.9% of the people, so when they are in dreams, then it represents their daily life, so their dreams are thus all about the details of everyday lives. Apart from the 99.999% ordinary people, only 0.001% of highly trained Dharma practitioners do not dream of details from their everyday life. When they are in dream, it is indeed when they are settled in the meditative state. We are now talking about ordinary people who stay in the three realms. Because of this, they need to receive training. Otherwise, they can never liberate from the cycle of karmic existence, but only have to suffer continuously. You are so fortunate to be reborn as human this life. The chance to take rebirth as human in the next life is extremely low. According to Buddha Sakyamuni's comment in a number of Buddha's sutras, the odds is so low that, without a second thought, you're unlikely to be reborn as human again. Therefore, it is better for you to practice now. What kind of training do we need? We need a kind of actual practice, which is a kind of program that enables us to restore Bodhicitta. In future, we will gradually teach you how to use this program. The third period is when we just lay down on the bed and are ready to fall asleep, or when we are seated for meditation. At time when we are ready to enter meditative state up to the time when we settle at the meditative state. These are the moments that we are ready to enter the Dharma realm. Then, what normally we could do? We need to input a program, which lets us ready to enter the Dharma realm. At the same time, you must remember initiation of program, which means the program has already existed but still you have to press the button. So, initiation of the program does not mean input the program. That is to say, you have already inputted a program before sleep. And when you just wake up, you have to press the button to initiate the program. And that is the initiation of program. For actual practice, it means that if we don't often train ourselves, so we don't know its content, and we don't know how to initiate the program and also what to initiate, therefore, we must conduct actual practice. But actual practice is not equal to initiation. Actual practice is indeed a kind of training. Input means that to input the program that you already know before you sleep. In that way, it would be easier for it to go into your subconsciousness. When you get used to input the program frequently, then you're able to initiate the program to save yourself when you have a nightmare in the future. Therefore, for the three programs, You need to clearly understand why we divide the 24 hours into 3 periods to visualize practice the first to the 5th steps of compassion and bodhicitta. And what are the reasons behind? As we have already explained earlier, the practice is divided into 3 steps. First, we press the button to initiate the program. Then we could directly enter the Dharma realm and stay there to attain Buddhahood. Second, we conduct the training first. Third, we input the program before sleep. And then we could press the button later. And that is the 3 steps. It is indeed a practice method that can help our intrinsic nature or Buddha nature or Dharma nature. It can help the already lost or hidden intrinsic nature or Buddha nature to restore the perfect enlightenment, or to restore our bodhicitta to become the most crystal clarity awareness. And that is the practice method. Now let's talk about this visualization practice. As explained earlier, when you just wake up from sleep, come out of the meditative concentration, or switch suddenly from one mode to another during your meditation, or after you die and fall into a coma and then awake, those are the moments that you enter the Dharma realm, which is equivalent to the realm where Dharma nature is all-pervasive, that is, exist everywhere. In order to enter the Dharma realm, you have to initiate the program of entering the Dharma realm, and that is the manifestation of your bodhicitta. When you suddenly switch from one state to another, for instance, when you're dead and then awake from the coma, you enter this state automatically, that indeed appears automatically. It is not your own visualization, but it just appears automatically. In fact, we have the chance to see the Dharma nature once or twice after we die. And the rare sun is that it is not created by yourselves, but it is a kind of mechanism that automatically occurs. Therefore, your bodhicitta will manifest, and it will appear in any second during these 4 periods. So, you should be mentally prepared. As a result, since we know bodhicitta will appear, we must press the initiation button regardless of whether it appears or not. If it suddenly appears, and we have already pressed the button to initiate the program, we will certainly be able to coordinate and enter the Dharma realm. On the other hand, if you wait for its appearance, and you also need to confirm its appearance so as to initiate the program, then it may be too late for you to catch the opportunity. And also, it is possible that you don't recognize that this is the manifestation of bodhicitta, or you don't even know that is its manifestation. So, we must remember to press the initiation button regardless of whether it appears or not. Thirdly, the explanation also means that after we die, the Dharma nature will automatically appear, in addition to the moment of waking up from sleep, or the moment of coming out of the meditative concentration, or the moment when we switch from one mode to another during meditation, or the moment after we die. The Dharma nature would have chances to automatically appear. Therefore, in 2011, we invited 3 most well-known experts on near-death experiences to give lectures at the Hong Kong Wan Chai Convention and Exhibition Center. We invited one of the speakers, Dr. Peter Fenwick, for dinner after the talk. He said that he had been practicing meditation for decades. In fact, he's more diligent than you in terms of practice. He often enters certain meditative states, but not the meditative state of the Dharma realm. Dr. Peter Fenwick introduced the video clip from Alan, who died and he entered Dharma realm, and later came back to life and described that phenomenon. The video lecture, Essence of the Heart Sutra, available on the Dajom Buddhist Association's TV channel on YouTube, includes a part that explains what Alan described, that is, entering the state of oneness. He kept saying, one, but was unable to explain what that was. It was in fact the state of oneness. However, he was unable to say it out. Dr. Peter Fenech said that he had many friends who liked meditation and practicing Dharma with the aim of attaining Buddhahood. He has a friend who entered that state suddenly during a meal, but was unable to say that is the state of oneness. He was only able to describe it as a state of attaining Buddhahood. And that is the state Alan entered. He then asked whether by entering that state, one can attain Buddhahood. We responded to him this way. If you really want to attain Buddhahood, there are 10 stages called 10 grounds. You have to practice all the stages and achieve the 10th stage before you're ready to attain Buddhahood. It's difficult to answer the question by just describing the sudden entrance of a state during a meal, but was not able to provide thorough description on the details of the state. It is because you might have entered the 8th ground, the 4th ground or the 7th ground, but you might think that is attaining Buddhahood. However, can someone enter the Dharma realm? Actually, yes. They are the 4 situations that I have just described. At certain state, the cross points when one state suddenly transfers to another state. And at the transmission time and at that unstable stage, it would suddenly appear. When you read Buddhist sutras, you often come across the term, not yet reached the attainment of concentration. But no one can explain it. So, what is not yet reached the attainment of concentration? For a long time, no one has been able to explain not yet reached the attainment of concentration. In fact, not yet reached the attainment of concentration is a transitional period. As I've just said, not yet reached the attainment of concentration is a mode that appears in meditation. You normally enter the meditative state with deluded thoughts precipitated by 40% to 50%. One day, you practice very well and meditate into a state with deluded thoughts precipitated by 50%. But suddenly it jumps to 70% to 80%. The difference of the transition for the precipitation of the deluded thoughts can vary greatly. And thus you would have the state of not yet reached the attainment of concentration appear. In fact, out of a sudden, you jump a huge gap from one mode to a high-level mode. And this kind of transition would also have the opportunity to suddenly reveal the state of the entire Dharma nature. But the question is whether you can grasp it, and whether you recognize it when it appears. There can be light when this awareness revealed. There can be images to be seen. But sometimes there is no image and light, only an realizing and sensing. Therefore, you need to be able to judge, otherwise you'll miss it. This is the explanation for not yet reached the attainment of concentration. I have talked about the environment for life after death many times. You can look back these videos. Light may suddenly appear at that state when you wake up from a coma, but you may not capture its form. While for the light appeared in the second time, you normally would see more things. For example, you will see things like a lot of dazzling light, etc. Therefore, you should understand that in the unstable state that going through one mode to another, the Dharma nature would have a chance to emerge. However, why it appeared suddenly during a meal, it depends on his condition and what he was thinking about at that time. Was there a huge difference for that state by the time the one mode moved to the second mode? Then there is an opportunity to appear. However, the probability would be very small for a person was eating and all of a sudden changed to another mode where the difference between the two modes was huge. The probability is just very small. He also didn't provide a detailed account, so I told him that it might be the state of the 4th ground or the 6th ground, but not necessarily entering the state of the Dharma realm. Nonetheless, would it be certainly not successful? It may not be, because the appearance may happen in daily life, though with a very small chance. This is the explanation for you to understand. How do we practice? By making use of these 4 periods, which is the easiest and most probably moment for the state of the Dharma nature to manifest. How to initiate this program. We are going to learn how to initiate now, regardless whether it will appear or not. We must press the initiation button. The first step of the initiation is to visualize our own intrinsic nature, full of heart of pity, to integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness, and then to melt all sentient beings' suffering. This is the first step. I will explain its use in detail later. In the second step, you should visualize your intrinsic nature, full of heart of mercy, and together with all sentient beings to merge into the infinite bliss of Dharma. I have said that before, Dharma bliss is one of the characteristics of the Dharma realm. Dharma bliss is an eternal happiness, and its happiness is beyond description. The third step, you need to visualize this kind of intrinsic nature is all-pervasive and is a kind of awareness. And only the awareness of the perfect enlightenment can be all-pervasive. As long as you have a deviation of 0.0001%, it cannot be all-pervasive. But we must visualize it to be absolutely correct and also to be all-pervasive. Now let me explain these three procedures. The first is heart of pity. You need to reveal the heart of pity of your intrinsic nature, such that you have already completed the first step to relieve sufferings. Then, why do you need to reveal the heart of pity? Because you want to integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness, and then dissolve all sentient beings' sufferings. This is heart of pity and removing sufferings. Then, the second step is to give happiness. You need to arouse a heart of mercy and then together with all sentient beings to merge with the infinite bliss of Dharma. It is to give Dharma bliss and is the highest level Dharma bliss. If you're unable to give the highest level Dharma bliss to other peoples, then you also won't be able to integrate with the Dharma realm and attain Buddhahood. Also, you yourself won't have the highest level Dharma bliss. All have to be done at the same time. As such, you have to do giving happiness and is the highest level one, but not the happiness like giving a sweet to others to ease the bitterness in their mouth. It should be the true and the highest level happiness. Third, the intrinsic nature is all-pervasive, which I'll explain to you a bit later. Now I'll begin with the first point. Why you need to integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness after arousing the heart of pity. You must never skip this step. You should never help all sentient beings to dissolve their sufferings after arousing heart of pity, where you have skipped a step. You should not do it, as you forget to integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness. Otherwise, it will go wrong for sure. So, you must remember, I teach this method openly to the public. Then, it is unlike the way that I teach my disciples, who are close to me. If a disciple makes a mistake in practice, then I'll ask him or her to describe the situation and then I know what has gone wrong. I'll ask the disciple to describe the steps in detail one by one, then I know he or she has skipped the second, the third or the fourth step. So, I can save the disciple based on the step he or she has skipped. Not only I can save the disciple, but at the same time make up this gap. But as you are not my disciple, and I'm teaching this method openly for your self-study, it is my duty to remind you that you should not leave behind any single step, in particular. You must not skip the step to integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness. Do not skip this step, otherwise you will certainly fail and be harmed. Why do sentient beings suffer? If they created some evil karma, and such evil karma have made a sentient being suffer. Now it's the sufferings of all sentient beings. So the magnetic field of all sentient beings, evil karma, is such a gigantic, malignant magnetic field. Thus, if you have not integrated with all Buddhas as oneness, But you directly connect with the most vicious magnetic field of all sentient beings' sufferings, and you have not restored the perfect enlightenment, such that you don't have the great power. So how can you overcome and withstand the disturbance from this vicious magnetic field and avoid yourself falling into the sufferings too? The answer is obvious, as you've already known. It will go wrong. Therefore, to make the difference, you must remember to integrate yourself with all Buddhas to become oneness. When you integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness, even though your awareness has not restored the 100% perfect enlightenment, but as you have visualized to integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness, then all Buddhas will help you to restore to 100%. As such, afterward, when you melt other sentient beings' sufferings, it won't go wrong, as you are under the protection of all Buddhas, which is the most powerful protection from all Buddhas. With that, it will be much easier for you to restore the perfect enlightenment, because you visualize it. So even though you may only possess 10% of awareness, but at time you have integrated with all Buddhas, you can get their help. Nonetheless, if we do not visualize the heart of pity, and also do not melt all sentient beings' sufferings, but just seek for protection, so we just visualize to integrate with all Buddhas every day, you also should not do that. Why? I once said that Bodhicitta itself has a kind of nature of compassion in it, and would really do the act of remove sufferings and give happiness, and that is the crystal clarity awareness. Awareness originally contains such characteristics. Therefore, if you want to integrate with all Buddhas, but you don't visualize heart of pity, so you might not merge even 1%. Because your nature doesn't fit with that of the Buddhas. All Buddhas are full of compassion, are key characteristics of their Bodhicitta, but you do not visualize those, therefore you can't enter. It's as simple as that. We are now in the three realms, following the law of causes and effects. Where there is a cause, there must be an effect. Where there is no cause, there won't have an effect. You do not visualize heart of pity, then you would not have that effect. If you do not visualize heart of pity, but only to visualize to the integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness, then it won't have that effect, and you are also unable to integrate with them to become oneness. But if you have aroused heart of pity, and you wish to integrate with all Buddhas, then what is the purpose of the integration? The purpose is to melt the suffering of all sentient beings. If you follow the steps, then you could melt the sufferings of all sentient beings. Thus, you must remember, and I've explained clearly. So, if you skip a certain step and things go wrong, then please do not come to ask me why things go wrong. Indeed, I've already explained very clearly. So, please remember firmly, we do these for two reasons. First, to be protected. Second, to restore our perfect enlightenment. After that, we are able to save sentient beings. In the first part of the visualization, there are 3 steps to be completed. Second, if we fail to carry out the first and the second step, there will be no way for us to integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness. And the reason behind has already been explained. Not only to remove sufferings, we should also give happiness. Therefore, in the second part, you need to visualize your intrinsic nature, full of heart of mercy, together with all sentient beings merging into the endless blissfulness. As explained earlier, prior to entering the Dharma realm, we're very likely to fall back out without protections. In fact, if you don't have the perfect enlightenment, you won't be able to enter the Dharma realm. Even you enter, you will fall back out. When you just wake up, or during a meditative concentration, or just come out from a meditative state, or after you die at the moment you wake up from a coma. you would truly see the manifestation of your own crystal clarity, awareness. Let's say you realize it, but still you would fall back out very fast. Why? It is because you're not protected and thus fall out easily. Therefore, if we have already conducted the visualization before formally entering the Dharma realm, and that means we have already aroused heart of pity and heart of mercy, and also we have already integrated with all Buddhas to become oneness, so, at that time, when suddenly our intrinsic nature appears, we can then merge immediately and enter the Dharma realm, and then we can stay there. That's why this is the initiation program. If you do not initiate beforehand, you won't be fast enough. First, you don't respond at the speed that is fast enough for you to blend into the Dharma realm. Second, you don't respond at the speed that is fast enough for you to even initiate. But you already fall back out. This is why before your awareness and Dharma nature formally emerge, before the Dharma realm appears, before your intrinsic nature presence, you need to perform these steps beforehand. That's why it is called initiation. Then, why would one drop out of the Dharma realm so easily? One major reason for withdrawing from the Dharma realm is that, even if you are protected by all the Buddhas, that cuts you off from all the karmic connections tracking you by all your external karmic creditors, so that you won't be harassed and be pulled out from the Dharma realm by them. But there is still one thing that can make you fall back out: your own mind. Buddhas can protect you and cut you off from all the external karmas. But can they adjust your mind to attain the perfect enlightenment? This must rely on your own. You need to find a way to bring about the sincerest bodhicitta in order to restore the perfect enlightenment and act in concert with all Buddhas. However, if there are some thoughts in your mind, they would create vulnerability of your own. For example, you will be thinking, have I entered the Dharma realm yet? If you haven't, you may feel hungry and would like to eat first. If you have these thoughts, you will fail because such thoughts can soon link you with the three realms. Because of your thoughts, that the entire protection from the Buddhas will be permeated by the entire attractional forces, so that you would connect with the three realms. As you feel hungry, think of eating. So you forget to initiate the program of Dharmanatur. Even though that has not yet completed, you already think of other things, such that the protections would break. Therefore, in order to succeed, we must constantly practice these three visualizations and do them in one go. And no other distraction should appear during the process. Only those bodhisattvas who are 8th ground or above with stable precepts, meditative concentration and wisdom, do not need to visualize to integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness. However, if they choose not to, even though the bodhisattvas of the 8th ground, it will delay their time of attaining Buddhahood. Why? Because you are not protected by Buddhas if you don't integrate with them. So, even though you're very good at precepts, meditative concentration and wisdom, you can withstand 80% of the external karmic forces, hence called the 8th ground. And your inner deluded thoughts has also dropped by at least 80%. However, there remains 20%. But in case of accidental failure, an arising thought may link you with the externals. Or accidentally. Without the protections, the external karmic forces and the entanglement with karmic predators will pull you out of the Dharma realm, even though you could have stayed there at first. Therefore, even though bodhisattvas of the 8th ground will not turn back down, that is, they will continue their Dharma practice once reborn. But many hindrances will still appear due to the lack of protection. These hindrances will delay their time required for them to attain Buddhahood. Although bodhisattvas of the 8th ground and above do not have to follow the steps I said, particularly to integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness, but they will have to encounter a lot of hindrances. What is the 8th ground? In fact, our practice is divided into 10 grounds, while there are 16 grounds in esoteric Buddhism. How exactly do these steps and levels are divided? You may refer to the article Biographies of Founder Master in issue 7 of the Lake of Lotus. You can read it again. What is the consequence if one is not protected? Let me give you an example now. What is the consequence of not getting protection? There are a lot of Rinpoche and gurus outside, teaching a practice called Tonglen, giving and taking. How to practice Tonglen? First, one inhales black smoke, which represents one inhales all the sufferings of all sentient beings, where it is in the form of black smoke and black armor, and thus one would remove all sentient beings' suffering by replacing them to suffer. And then, one exhales the white smoke, which is one's own best, the white smoke, linking to one's virtuous deeds, to give happiness to all sentient beings. Why such a practice has been transmitted out? They have cited a case from Buddhist Sakyamuni in the Jatakas, which is the extremely popular stories of former lives of the Buddha. Buddhist Sakyamuni practiced Dharma for 3 great Asamhaya kalpas before attained Buddhahood. In one of his former lives, he fell into the realm of hells due to an accidental violation of precepts. He was whipped by the jailer constantly. He dragged a heavy carriage and whipped by the jailer if he walked a bit slowly. He was bruised and lacerated from whipping, in great agony. There was another person beside him. Both were whipped by the jailer, very painful. He had practiced Dharma after all. There's always a character type of body in his mind. There's still some, even though it's vague. His compassion and bodhicitta suddenly arose. He thought that although it's extremely painful, but he still could carry on. But the person next to him was worse, being beaten to a mass of bruises, whose skin and bone had been mutilated beyond recognition. He could feel the person's pain and knew that he couldn't endure any more. He thus decided to help him. Even though he could not move 2 carriages at the same time and was whipped by the jailer constantly, he hanged on and helped the other persons to drag his carriage. Because he suddenly aroused the bodhicitta. Instantly, he got out of the realm of hells and returned to the realm of human beings to continue his Dharma practice. So, a lot of Rinpoche cite this case to argue that it is very good for you to practice this method, Tonglen. You don't need to be afraid as long as your bodhicitta arises. As long as you can help sentient beings with mercy and pity to remove their sufferings and give them happiness, you will definitely attain the Buddhahood. You can arouse the true bodhicitta. Just like Buddha Sakyamuni in his former life, who could escape from realm of hells. As such, don't be afraid, don't fear the black smoke. But I now tell you, it won't work. Why? You must remember, I've said this many times, visualization means making a connection. Why? Because, as I said, there are 2 cores in Dharma. One is emptiness, neither existence nor voidness. The other is everything comes from the mind. When our mind visualizes, it will tie up with anything. Visualization means the mind sends out attractional force to draw other attractional forces. Hence, you will certainly be connected, as this is the principle of everything comes from the mind. Thus, any visualization equals connection. As such, you should be very careful whether your guru taught you right or wrong, and whether his teaching harms you. So, you should be very careful. If you would like to know the reason why everything comes from the mind, and whether scientists provide any evidence for it, for these explanations, you can look at the video again. Everything comes from the mind, available on Dajong Buddhist Association's TV channel on YouTube. When you inhale the black smoke, You absorb the sufferings of sentient beings and connect yourself to a vicious magnetic field. Why? The sufferings of all sentient beings are the results of their evil karma, non-virtuous behavior and negative karmic forces. Linking up the suffering from all sentient beings is equivalent to connecting all the black smoke, which in turn forms a huge magnetic field of evil karma. So, you will surely get yourself into trouble when you inhale the black smoke into your body. You have to bear in mind that the three realms follow the law of causes and effects. Whenever there is a cause, there is an effect. When you inhale the black smoke, you will definitely link with the vicious magnetic field. Just like taking drugs, you will be poisoned and get addicted. It doesn't matter if you practice Dharma so well that you're a bodhisattva of the 8th ground. You will still get addicted if you take drugs. Will you die if you swallow poison? Of course. You may live a few days longer if you have better meditative concentration or resistance. But you will be poisoned and die eventually, as the three realms follow the law of causes and effects. So don't think that this is taught by a Rinpoche, a guru or a Dharma king, therefore, and there's no need for you to be worried. They will protect me, but, in fact, they won't even be able to protect themselves if they inhale the black smoke, let alone to save you. Hence, it won't work before most of sentient beings have aroused Bodhicitta, that is, before they have truly aroused Bodhicitta. If you inhale the black smoke, you will be drawn into this vicious magnetic field. This will also give rise to your own evil karma. We have a lot of evil karma in our portfolio of virtuous and non-virtuous deeds. As long as the evil karma is not triggered, we can still use our virtuous deeds to practice Dharma, so that we have a chance to be liberated from the cycle of karmic existence. But if you bring the evil karma all out, then you will no longer be able to continue to practice Dharma. Rather, you would suffer endlessly and would not be able to liberate from the cycle of karmic existence. And this will be very serious. A bodhisattva of the 8th ground or above is very stable in terms of precepts, meditative concentration and wisdom. They're able to use the method, but it will still slow them down to become a Buddha. If they're willing to do so, that's their choice. Bodhisattvas of the 8th ground will not backslide and give up Dharma practice anymore. But not you. You will backslide and give up Dharma practice, and will fall into the realm of hells. Therefore, you should definitely not learn this method. I once warned my disciples not to practice this method, but one of them disobeyed and had gotten himself into trouble. Luckily, I found out just in time and saved him. I couldn't have saved him if I was late. It was very serious. He didn't listen. He thought that Guru, you said that you were very compassionate, but other lamas were really compassionate. Who taught good methods to inhale other people's black smoke, and that's truly compassion. However, Guru, you told us not to inhale. I warned all my disciples at that time, but I would never say it publicly. I only said this internally to my disciples, do not practice Tonglen, or you'll be in trouble. Maybe I did not explain clearly. I thought my disciples would have strong faith in me. I thought my disciples would listen to me, but he didn't. He really practiced this method. I didn't know he did, only knew he was not all right. Seemed like getting into trouble. So, I went to save him. After he was saved and stabilized, he told me he had practiced this method. But I had already told him not to. So why he still practiced it, he did not reply. But disciples are like this. This disciple had great compassion. He would take a detour around the grassland, in order not to step on and kill the ants. He was so compassionate, but he didn't listen to me and practice this method. He thought that this was taught by Dharma King and Rinpoche. They said it's alright to practice, then it should be fine. They all said fine except you. Who do you think you are? Although I was his guru, he still insisted on practicing this method, and so he was getting into trouble. Who saved him when he was in trouble? It was certainly I who saved him, not that Rinpoche who taught him the method. Of course not. That Rinpoche didn't know him, not even his name. Although that Rinpoche taught him, but perhaps that Rinpoche didn't know he was getting into trouble by practicing this method. Nor that Rinpoche knew that it would go wrong by practicing this method, and thus that Rinpoche taught you this method. In the end, he dragged in his guru to use a lot of energy in order to save him. Therefore, this is one of the reasons why I am so afraid of accepting a large number of disciples. This is also why I am very strict in accepting disciples. Some disciples only look up to the names, but ignore the principles and analysis. They don't study the principles of Buddhism. He thought that other people's teachings are correct, that one with Compa-Sion should inhale black smoke. And he raised an example of Buddha Sakyamuni in his former life, who left the realm of hells by doing so. I did not explain in detail before. The reason I do it today and openly to the public is because of the dependent arising. My disciple had gotten into trouble, a serious trouble, because he practiced this method. Even though I saved him, but there are many other sentient beings practicing this method too. When they get into trouble, but don't know they are in trouble, and thus no one would go to save them. I used to afraid of getting involved, did not want to offend some Dharma kings, and didn't want to be excluded and attacked by others. Therefore, I would not say it publicly. But since the incident of my disciple, I felt that this was a dependent arising. It was a message from Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that questions me for being so afraid of getting into trouble. Not telling the truth, even though I knew sentient beings will suffer and die, but I still didn't speak up. This was wrong. It was a violation of the Bodhisattva precepts. Why I did not say it? I should have told the truth. As such, I feel that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas hinted me to bring this up. So, I explain it today. They have used the Buddha Sakyamuni's story in Jatakas to explain. And I'll also use this case to explain, so that they are able to learn the truth. Please carefully think about the story again. The mind that Buddha Sakyamuni, in his former life, had aroused on that day in hell was Bodhicitta, which is full of compassion. He said, "Let me help you pull your carriage. Let me help you." When you think about the order, which thought goes first? Was the first thought, Bodhicitta? I arouse a heart of pity. Let me help you pull the carriage, so he came up with the heart of pity first. Then, did he visualize the connection, that is, to pull the carriage for all the sentient beings in hell? No, he didn't. He only helped the one next to him. Subsequently, did he mention to remove the suffering for all sentient beings, including those who are not in the realm of hells? For all the endless sentient beings, let me relieve your sufferings. Did he say this? Does this Buddha Sutra say that there were connections established? No. Then it makes a big difference. Please think about the order. I wanted to help you to pull your carriage. And he really did it. This was within his capability. He could really pull these two carriages. He also considered that he could withstand the jailer's whipping and being beaten to a mass of bruises. He only did it by knowing that he could sustain it. Therefore, he did make it at the same time. He pulled two carriages, was beaten to massive bruises by the jailer, and was able to sustain it. You can see that he had really aroused Bodhicitta. He also accomplished both Bodhicitta in aspiration and Bodhicitta in action. So, at that moment, the power of the crystal clarity, awareness, the Bodhisattva, and the perfect enlightenment suddenly manifested slightly. And this slight manifestation had really pulled him out of the realm of hells. And that is why he could leave the realm of hells. And also subsequently he could continue to practice Dharma. However, he did not attain Buddhahood immediately, because his bodhicitta and the perfect enlightenment only appeared a little to help him to escape from the realm of hells. Once he escaped, his bodhicitta got blocked out again. And thus he had to continue to practice Dharma through the 3 great Asamkhya Kalpas. Therefore, it's never mentioned in Jatakas that Buddha Sakyamuni, in his former life, has experienced all these. It only mentioned the arising of bodhicitta, so think about it. What will one connect after arousing bodhicitta? One will connect with all Buddhas in Bodhisattva's purest magnetic field. So, indeed, he had connected with the largest and purest magnetic field, therefore, it was not only the instant arousing of his own bodhicitta, but also the connection with the purest magnetic fields of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that saved him out of hell. He neither connected with the vicious magnetic field and visualized black smoke, nor he visualized pulling the carriage for all sentient beings and removing all their sufferings. He only thought of the one next to him. So he didn't link with the huge magnetic fields of evil karma, he only linked with the vast magnetic field of virtuous deeds, that is, he aroused bodhicitta, such that all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were touched. Therefore, his nature and all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas' nature merged and formed connection, so that he could liberate from the realm of hells. Hence, you would notice that it was not practicing Tonglen that helped him. Instead, it's because he didn't take the wrong steps. If his steps were wrong, he could not get out of the realm of hells and would only continue to suffer there, because he linked with the most vicious magnetic field. Therefore, you should understand clearly. I have never explained it in such detail before, including the explanation of the story. I thought my disciple was very confident in me, he wouldn't practice this method as I told him not to. But he did. This is the difficulty of being a guru. It turns out that you have to explain everything in great detail, and explain details again if there's anything unclear. However, the guru has limited energy. I can look after dozens of disciples easily. When one of them is in trouble, I am able to know quickly. But if there are too many disciples and something happens, I may not know. So, if a guru accepts a few thousands or tens of thousands of disciples, he doesn't even know your name, doesn't know who you are, so how can he save you? In fact, he doesn't even know he has done something wrong, the source of the problem, because he doesn't even know he has taught his disciples wrongly. So, how can he save you? So, you have to understand. I want to ensure that sentient beings can analyze and understand the truth, so that they would develop wisdom to save themselves, but not least tend to others recklessly. Therefore, what are the reasons to cause the trouble? First, this disciple was overconfident. He thought that he was better than the bodhisattvas of the 8th ground, and thus could practice this method. Some gurus do not distinguish the levels. In fact, many gurus don't reach the required level of Buddhist Dharma. Even though you read lots of Buddhist sutras, including this story. But if you are unable to develop wisdom, then you would not understand what this story is about. The story mentions that the arousing of bodhicitta and compassion can liberate one from hell. It's that simple. But, in fact, there are step 1, 2, and 3. Do you just help the person next to you, or help all sentient beings? Do you arousing bodhicitta as step 1 and instantly connect to the magnetic field of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas? Do you carry out this step first or connect with evil karma first? It is in fact very different. And that is the in-depth meaning. If a guru's realization has not yet reached a certain point, then, in fact, he would not understand this story. Without a proper understanding, these gurus are rather innovative to come up with these methods to teach their disciples. And also, they have taught their disciples regardless of their disciples' levels. You are not teaching a bodhisattvas of the 8th ground or above, who, by practicing your method, would only delay his time of attaining Buddhahood, but would not die. But for other sentient beings, they would die because of your teachings. Therefore, you cannot teach irrespective of the levels. This is why esoteric Buddhism has to be taught AC according to the level of the disciple. Likewise, Buddhist sutras state that it is prohibited to transmit empowerment to sentient beings if they have not yet reached the level of empowerment. If a guru gives him empowerment, this guru would violate a precept. Which precept does the guru violate? It is to explain esoteric Buddhism Dharma to sentient beings who are not mature enough to understand. And that is the 7-root downfall. By violating this precept, one would get downfall into the realm of hells. Many Buddhist sutras and precepts have already explained these. But why are some Rinpoches still conducting a large number of empowerments? Very simple, it can be said that he's been distracted by personal gains, in order to have more disciples, to expand their own sects and their own Buddhist centers. He pays no attention to what the Buddhist sutras say, feeling that he can surpass them. But the problem is that if the disciples haven't reached a certain level before receiving empowerments, then giving empowerment to them would be harmful to them. As a result, you can see that those who practicing esoteric Buddhism could receive more than 100 empowerments. They often show off their empowerments, saying that they are guaranteed to be successful. But they have not truly trained their own mind. Therefore, this is the reason why they won't succeed in their practice and will fall into hell. Their guru goes to hell, and so will they? Because they're all linked together. Who said this? The Buddhist sutras said so according to the precepts. You need to be careful, in fact, that a guru should not be distracted by prophets. He should teach according to the Buddhist sutras, that is, teach his disciples based on the levels. He should not bring out the greed, hatred and ignorance of a large number of sentient beings. If he conducts a large number of empowerments, which would just like large oceans that bring out lots of greed, hatred and ignorance, then the receivers will be in chaos. This is why many practitioners of esoteric Buddhism nowadays are in a state of chaos, and why they will certainly fall, as Guru Rinpoche said. As a snake on a bamboo, it can only either climb up or go down. If in your Dharma practice, regardless of esoteric Buddhism or exoteric Buddhism, Sutrayana, you evoke your own greed, hatred and ignorance vigorously, then you will surely fall. It will only be useful to bring out our own bodhisattva and the perfect enlightenment. However, some gurus, whom I don't want to criticize, teach this method with good intentions. They do not teach the God of Wealth method, transmit the empowerment of the God of Wealth, encourage you to make more money, or arouse your greed, hatred and ignorance. Originally, the guru has a good intention to evoke your bodhisattva, however, without the understanding of Dharma. So he doesn't reach that level, but he has still transmitted this method. Thus, this has gotten people into trouble. So, I'd like to tell you, do not practice this method. There is nothing I can do if you don't listen to me. If you're not my disciple, and you get into trouble after practicing this method, and I would not even know that you are in trouble, so how can I save you? Let's now take a closer look again. The first visualization is removing sufferings, and the second visualization is giving happiness. within the first visualization, after we integrate with all Buddhas to become oneness. Then we do the dissolve and blend in. Dissolving is to ease all sentient beings' sufferings. This is to benefit oneself and also benefit others. So, how to benefit oneself and also benefit others? Remember that when you dissolve these sufferings, you must also include your own sufferings. All sentient beings include yourself. Because you haven't attained Buddhahood at this moment, so you should also include yourself in the practice. That's why it's called benefiting oneself and also benefiting others. As such, do not leave yourself behind while visualizing. You have to dissolve your own sufferings, too. What kind of force can you use after integrating with all Buddhas? Use the force from the enormous virtuous magnetic field to dissolve the sufferings from the vast vicious magnetic field with one positive to overcome one negative. And that is what you do. We should blend into the Dharma bliss. How can you prove that you dissolve these sufferings and there's already no more magnetic field with negative energy? You should do this by using a positive magnetic field, and that is all-pervasive. What is the positive magnetic field? That is the Dharma bliss. So, when you and all sentient beings blend into the infinite Dharma bliss, for the part where you blend into is benefiting oneself, while benefiting others is where all sentient beings also blend into. That blending into Dharma bliss and is also all-pervasive can actually achieve the result where the positive covers and dissolves the negative. Thus, there is no more negative energy, but only positive energy left. So you should do it like this. So, this visualization has already done with the third and the fourth step, which is Bodhicitta in aspiration, and Bodhicitta in action. You must remember, the Dharma realm is a state of oneness following the law of non-attainment. Because it's oneness, there's no second thought, only one thought. So, what is the thought? It is the thought of the perfect enlightenment, the thought of the Bodhicitta and awareness, and the thought that is full of compassion. Only this thought and nothing else. It's the crystal clarity, awareness, it's oneness. As such, there are no causes and effects. You should not have any other thought. As soon as any thought comes up, you will fall back to the three realms. Three realms are where we are, following the law of causes and effects. Causes and effects exist in the dualistic or multiplistic state. Therefore, prior to formally entering the Dharma realm, when we're still getting ready to enter, please remember, there are still causes and effects. So, we must have a protection or insurance mechanism. This is very important. With that, we can perform the fifth step. However, if we don't have the protection or insurance mechanism, even though we have done the first to the fourth step, it is still impossible for us to complete the fifth step. Now, let me explain what is this protection or insurance mechanism. First, we must first visualize to integrate with all Buddhas, and by using the perfect enlightenment to dissolve all sentient beings' sufferings, that is, using a positive to cover a negative. We stay in the perfect enlightenment, that without any deviation and any attachment, in order to dissolve the sufferings of sentient beings, so that we can benefit oneself and also benefit others. And without hindrance. What is a second thought? Some people are very narrow-minded and cannot do well in their daily Dharma practices. When he visualizes dissolving all the sufferings of sentient beings, melting a negative with a positive, he thinks like this: every sentient being can be saved, except the person hindering my promotion. I should be the manager, but he took my position. I hate him, who is my number one karmic creditor. Hence, I have no concern about his sufferings. So, I'll save every single sentient being except this person. He'll be left out when I am visualizing. So, I would not visualize that he doesn't have sufferings. If you do like this, you have come up with a second thought. As such, you will fall back to the three realms. So, you won't make it. Therefore, please remember, no deviation and no attachment. You must not have any attachment. You cannot swap sufferings with virtue deeds. What's the practice of swapping sufferings with virtue deeds? That practice does not benefit oneself and also benefit the others, but harming oneself and benefiting others. I inhale other people's black smoke and give white light to them. This is called harming oneself and benefiting others, such that you'll lose balance and be drawn by the evil karma, and be unable to use the balanced characteristics of equality to enter the Dharma realm. In fact, one is able to enter the Dharma realm is due to the state of oneness. So, it is balanced. Only have oneness, but not the second thought. Therefore, it's extremely and completely balanced, and also without any deviation. As one only has oneness, so one doesn't have any deviation. You should remember, only with the balanced characteristics of equality, you can free from the sufferings of causes and effects, and enter the Dharma realm. On the other hand, Tonglen is a practice method that is off balance. Then, I would like to talk about the relationship between gurus and disciples. It is a powerful cause and effect relationship, which easily results two phenomena, saving or implicating each other. So, all Dharma practitioners prior to attaining the Buddhahood, no matter you are a guru or not, or a self-learner who doesn't need a guru, you all have to be very careful. Now let me explain why there is a causal relationship between gurus and disciples. Once I've accepted your refuge and you'd like to take refuge with this guru, there actually exists an implicated commitment. You're willing to take refuge from me and to comply with me. I'm willing to accept your request to take refuge and to let you to devote to me. If something happens to you, I will help you. I would like you to follow my teaching. To ensure that what I teach is correct, I should have already practiced this method, know all the principles, have practiced to attain that level, know all the Dharma, know how the nature works, and clearly understand the principles. Because I've achieved this level of realization, and know that practicing this method will lead one to trouble, so I won't teach this method. If I know that practicing a method will untie the knots, then I will teach you. You can accept refuge from others when you've achieved this level. Accepting a disciple to take refuge means that you ought to protect him, protecting these disciples. It's already a commitment for the correlation. I promise to teach, save and protect you. While you promise to accept my protection and to comply with my teachings, I tell you not to practice those methods, then you would not practice those methods. The guru would break the commitment if he refuses to save the disciple in trouble. When the disciple is suffering seriously from karmic force but the guru does nothing to save him, saying, "It is none of my business, so I won't save you," then the guru is breaking the commitment. On the other hand, if the guru asks the disciple not to practice this method, but the disciple insists on practicing and get into trouble, it is the disciple who breaks the commitment. Because you've agreed to comply with his teachings when taking refuge. The guru asks you not to practice, then you should not practice. But if you practice, then this is breaking the commitment. There is also the issue on the difference between the authentic and fake gurus. And how do we identify these relationships, and the mutual causality? When we must save this disciple, it would only succeed if we trust each other, otherwise it won't work. When this disciple was in trouble, he was in a state of chaos. How did I manage to save him? Luckily, his family members were also my disciples who had confidence in me. I explained to his family members what to do, and how to do it. Following my instructions, his family members did what I said, and the disciple was saved. Indeed, it was very dangerous, and barely succeeded. If I found out late, or did not act on time, or none of the disciples beside him listened to what I said and did what I taught to save him, then I wouldn't be able to save him. Therefore, I feel this time the situation was very risky for me to save him. If he refuses to listen and practice carelessly again, then I don't know whether I could save him next time. Therefore, mutual trust is very important. Fortunately, there are some relatives besides him who also happen to be my disciples and trusted my words. So, I taught the relative to go left and he walked left. I told him to go right. He moved right, following all the steps one by one to save the disciple. Second, it's got to be an authentic guru. Fake gurus are different. Fake ones are not so kind, acting recklessly, or they have not achieved the sufficient level of Dharma or teaching correct life such that they won't be able to save their disciples. Only authentic gurus are capable of saving, provided that the disciples devotedly keep their samaya. In fact, would there be no need to save the disciple if the commitment has been broken? If the disciple breaks the commitment, then the guru is not obliged to rescue him. For example, seeing the disciple in trouble, if the situation is reaching the point where he can't be saved, or the situation is so serious that it is beyond the guru's ability, or it will involve a lot of good others of a bigger picture when saving him, then the guru may consider not to save him. Why? As this disciple has broken the commitment, the guru is no longer responsible for rescuing him, because the guru told him not to practice this method, but he did. So the guru no longer had the responsibility to save him. But why did I? I wanted to try my best to see whether there is a way to save him, but he didn't listen to what I said. As such, I talked to the person beside him so as to let the person to save him. I was willing to try to save him. But does it always work? Not always. It really depends on the degree of mutual trust, whether the authentic guru used the most effective and the best method, and in the meantime, whether the disciple who broke the commitment still has confidence in the guru. The disciple has broken the commitment because he doesn't trust his guru 100%. Whether he still has 40% to 50% trust remaining to the guru is very important. If there is, he may still be saved. But if he doesn't, even if the guru is willing to help, it may not work. So, remember, does the guru have the responsibility to save his disciples? It depends on whether the disciple has broken the commitment or not. If he has broken the commitment, the guru is not responsible for saving him. If the guru breaks the commitment, are the disciples obliged to continue to comply with him? Of course not, but it depends on what kind of commitments the guru has broken and what he has done. Like the Sogil scandal we mentioned at the previous lesson. Then, his disciples no longer have the responsibility, because the guru had broken the commitment. He abused his disciples, so that they have suffered a great deal, and also many disciples have withdrawn from their practices. Indeed, this is breaking the commitment. Regardless, it is because he was overdone and then get mad, or he was overwhelmed with greed, hatred and ignorance, and wanted to take even more advantages. In fact, he has already taken advantages over a dozen years, but eventually, the scandal has been unveiled. For whatever reasons, if the guru breaks the commitment, the disciple no longer needs to comply with a commitment that he formerly made with the guru. There is no need to continue to comply with. Indeed, this is helping each other. At time to help each other, in fact, it relies on the level of trust. Being implicated means that if the guru goes astray, breaks the commitment or teaches incorrectly due to inferior ability, being a fake or unqualified guru. Fake and unqualified are two different things. Fake means false, no lineage, deception. Unqualified means that even though he is an authentic guru, with proof of lineage, authenticated by someone, with physical evidence, and everything, but he doesn't have the sufficient level, such that he teaches you wrongly, and this is called unqualified. If your guru is fake or unqualified, and both you and he do not devotedly keep the commitment, then both have violated the precepts, and both of you will be implicated. In esoteric Buddhism, therefore, the relationship between the guru and the disciple is like a cow with a circle in the nose. Every cow has a circle in the nose connecting with each other. The old cow pulls the calf, i.e. disciple, to climb a mountain. If the disciple disobeys, then he violates the precept. Hence, if the guru accepts many disciples, thousands of disciples, who all slip their feet and fall off, their weight will hang on the nose of the old cow. When the old cow can no longer carry the weight, they will all fall together and die. Therefore, there are many cases in esoteric Buddhism, the guru and disciples all fall into hell like that. When a method, for example, Tonglen, is taught by an unqualified guru, many people learned and suffered. All these people are linked with a guru who teaches them this method. What would happen if this guru can no longer carry the load? All of them will fall altogether. You may say that the guru teaches this method out of good intentions, wanting you to have bodhicitta. Why is the result so miserable? The reason is the tractional force of the natural karma. It is not that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas want to punish a person. Do not get it wrong. When there is a cause, there will be an effect. Even Buddhas and Bodhisattvas cannot do anything about it. They can only try to find a way to save them. If the rescue is unsuccessful, they can do nothing about it. Because, as I've said many times, supernatural powers cannot defeat karmic forces. When there's no way to save them, you can do nothing about it. That is to say, the more disciples a guru accepts, the heavier the burden he carries. If the guru drags thousands of disciples, and the disciples observe the precepts well, but the guru violate the precepts, just like the guru, Sogyo, who is in trouble. As the guru pulls all the calves with his nose, when he fell, all disciples fell with him, too. Then, is there a way to avoid from falling? I've already said that if one party violates a precept, break the samaya, the other party no longer need to keep the commitments made previously. That is, they must detach from the implication of this circle as soon as possible. When they detach, they would no longer be dragged down to the hell. However, if you don't attach, and you insist to get implicated, as you are very loyal, and you very much trust this guru and insist to follow him, then you will fall together with him. This is the result of causes and effects. Of course, I neither mean to offend anyone, nor do I want to reverse anything. Don't get me wrong. In fact, I only deal with the matter on its merits, wishing to save these sentient beings with compassion, and analyze the reasons for them. In fact, I have no intention to offend anyone, because it's no good for our Dharma propagation and the entire Dajjom Buddhist Association's Dharma propagation. In fact, I know that what I say today will affect the breadth of our Dharma propagation in the future, but not its depth. I do this as I want to save these sentient beings, so I have no other choice. I have to speak up, hoping that what I say today will rescue most of the people. Of course, not everybody listens to me, but at least I can save those who are willing to listen to me. Those who think and analyze with wisdom. I hope to save them. Therefore, you must remember, the reason of being implicated is because of the guru-disciple relationships. Some may say, why not practice exoteric Buddhism? Then I don't need to find a guru, so that I would not be implicated as I don't have a guru. However, you will need to practice 3 great Asamhaya Kalpas as there is no one to teach you. So, why not find an authentic guru who can teach you? And let him guide you so that you won't spend 3 great Asamhaya Kalpas. One will still get downfall during the 3 great Asamhaya Kalpas. So, there is no difference, only one is faster, and the other is slower. So, it's important, but it is also difficult to find an authentic guru. To find a qualified guru, who would really verify each of his Dharma teachings and would not teach carelessly, is also quite difficult. How do you judge a guru to be fake or authentic? I'll teach you now. You can easily see that those gurus who often give empowerments publicly are certainly not qualified. It's stated very clearly in Avatamsaka Sutra, empowerments can only be granted to those who have achieved a certain level. It is not permissible to grant empowerment to someone who is not qualified. You cannot give empowerments publicly, like placing advertisement in newspapers to attract people to come, such that everybody could come and receive it. You don't know his name, cannot remember how he looks, don't even know him. But if he receives your empowerment, and when he's in trouble, you offer no help. Indeed, there isn't any commitment between the two parties, but you've transmitted empowerments to them, which seriously stimulates their greed, hatred and ignorance. Then you've implicated them, because they haven't reached the required level. You all transgress precept, and it is also against the sutra. As Buddha Shakyamuni said, it will cause trouble. But you do not listen. As such, you must remember this. In fact, it's easy to distinguish between fake and authentic gurus. Those who often give empowerments are fake ones. It's easy to tell, they are the unqualified gurus, who don't know that they'll implicate many others into trouble. It is in the perfect conduct, ascertaining the 3 vows, including the 3 sets of vows in the Hinayana, Mahayana and Vajrayana. If you've read the book by H.H. Dudjom Rinpoche, Perfect Conduct, Ascertaining the 3 Vows, it explains what a guru should do to handle such circumstances. This is how Buddha Sakyamuni dealt with the matter then. What did he do to the Diski places who violated a precept and broke the commitment? Those disciples would be put into Brahmadana, word in Pali, which means that they were prohibited from all conversation and communication with the Sangha group, including all other disciples. In our Dudjom Buddhist Association, Brahmadana means that those disciples are required to make the true repentance within 3 years. Then, they have to pass the precepts exam, which is the precepts exam of the perfect conduct. Ascertaining the 3 vows, only then they are allowed to come back. Why do we do this? I didn't make the rules of precepts, but only explain them. According to the rules, if a disciple has violated a precept and the guru ignores it, the guru will be implicated by the evil karma of the disciple, such that the guru and his disciple would fall into hell altogether. If the guru wishes to save the disciple as well as himself, he ought to carry out Brahmadana and make it clear to the disciple that, within 3 years, he will have to go through true repentance so that the guru can re-accept him as disciple and continue to save him. As long as he continues to be a disciple, the guru have the duty to protect, teach and save him. But if the disciple is not obedient, unwilling to repent, let alone taking the exam, then after 3 years, according to the rules of precepts, the guru can no longer accept this disciple. But if the guru insists on accepting this disciple, he will fall into hell together with the disciple. This is not a punishment, but is a result of the entire evil karma, because the guru has been drawn into this evil karma and dragged to hell. He is neither punished by Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, nor by those who establish these precepts. Buddha Shakyamuni did not lay these precepts, only explained rules of the nature for you. This means that the consequence of the matter is very serious. Just like stepping on a landmine, you will die. You should not do it. As a result, people state it as the precept and thus it become an explicit rule. In fact, it's not an explicit rule, not a law, not a punishment. It's just an explanation. Buddha Shakyamuni witnessed the situation, so he explained it, and urged people to be careful. As such, you regard it as the precept. Indeed, as a disciple, he should keep precepts and not implicate his guru. As a guru, he needs to speak up when he sees a disciple violating a precept. If you often accept refuge from thousands of people, but you do not know their names and who they are, you cannot help the disciple. You are unable to lend your hand when he is in trouble. However, both you and your disciple has made the commitment, which links you and your disciple together, and both would implicate with each other. You share the evil karma of the disciple when he violates a precept. He also shares the evil karma of yours when you violate a precept. You two are linked together like two cows. Therefore, even though you don't search for a guru, but if you just take a refuge, there is already a commitment and a connection, like a connection linking the noses of two cows together. Do not think you are fine by just practicing exoteric Buddhism. It's in fact the same. When someone takes refuge with the three jewels instead of taking for refuge, he does not take refuge with a guru. But, in fact, who is the jewel of Sangha? It is the person who teaches you Dharma, the person who accepts your refuge, so no matter who he is, they all have the responsibility. So, be careful. According to the law of nature, let's put aside precepts for now. Following the law of causes and effects, one has to be careful. There are still some details for the visualization that I teach you now. Following the rules of esoteric Buddhism, it is called mouth-to-ear transmission. The teaching is only allowed to be verbally told by mouth and learned through hearing by ears. It is not permissible to write down. Guidance of the detailed visualization should be provided verbally, so that I can teach you the 3 steps of visualization taught earlier. However, it is stipulated in esoteric Buddhism that gurus can only transmit to their disciples, and it has to be mouth-to-ear transmission, and is prohibited to write down. So, if you are an ordinary person, not my disciple, then I can't use voice to guide you to visualize. Therefore, if you are just self-study, do not take refuge from us, and so you are not our disciple, then you won't have this part of guidance, such that you will have a slow progress, as you have missed something, which are the important things. Nevertheless, the teaching today is still very important as it can really help a lot of people. Maybe you will say, why are you so selfish? Why does everything need to be confidential in esoteric Buddhism? Why don't you have the Bodhisattva and teach everybody? Why can't you use the voice to lead people to visualize on YouTube? Why is it not allowed? I'll explain the utmost truth to you. If you read Kasishigaba Bodhisattva Sutra before, you may note that when we die, there will be many karmic creditors, thousands of them, coming to look for you. These karmic creditors are drawn from the evil karma we've committed over countless past lifetimes. Each time when we die, or before we die, if they manage to track you down, they will gather around you, waiting for an opportunity to hurt you. Among these karmic creditors, some are very capable in the spiritual realm. They can read your mind and know what you think. Only 1 out of 10 can do that, the rest 9 do not have such ability. But they ought to wait next to you. They would listen to the words you say during the practice, and the voice I lead you during the visualization. What would they do after hearing it? After they hear it, they will understand how you visualize in the first step that you intend to integrate with all Buddhas. Therefore, they will transform into the image of all Buddhas and merge with you, thus you will actually merge with your karmic creditors. This is what they will do to harm you. Once you tell the contents of the visualization, the karmic creditors will be able to breach your Dharma practice. This is why I won't say the details of visualization but only the principles. In fact, knowing the principles can already benefit you greatly. So, can you really try to practice it? It's fine for you to practice. This is because it's your brain after all. In particular, if your mind nature is right and you keep the precepts, then you will arouse the true compassion, so that you can merge with all the real Buddhas. But if you have fake compassion, that is, you do not truly want to save sentient beings, so if your compassion is fake, then your karmic creditors can take advantage of it. So, it depends on your own mind nature. This is why we pay great attention to see whether or not the mind nature deviates, as it affects your visualization. However, if the disciple is taught by a guru, who protects the disciple by other methods, then it will be different. In that case, even though the mind nature of the disciple is slightly deviated from the center, he can still be protected. This is the true reason why there must be a guru, and why uses the voice to guide the practice. But why can't I speak the details of the visualization openly? This is because I don't want your karmic creditors to be able to break in, such that I am not able to rescue you. This is why I cannot do it. I can only teach it during the joint practice at our Dojom Buddhist Association. So, what is a joint practice? What do we practice during the joint practice? It's to teach a disciple how to formally enter the Dharma realm or go to the Buddha's Pure Lands after death. If he is unable to stay in the Dharma realm and falls back out, then can he enter the Buddha's Pure Lands, such that he won't fall into the realm of hells, realm of Hanjiawa ghosts, or realm of animals. This training is based on the mouth-to-ear transmission, and I will use my voice to guide qualified disciples during the joint practice. Of course, if some disciples are lazy and do not keep their samaya, they cannot be taught unless they have truly repented. Joint practice is the special training at the Dojom Buddhist Association, through which we teach the disciples. We need to understand the visualization practice for all the 3 periods within the 24 hours each day. You have to practice them all, in order to increase the success rate, and it is also ensured. I've already explained earlier, once you have completed the 1st to the 4th point, how do you complete the 5th point? You have to visualize that your intrinsic nature is all-pervasive. You think about it. What is Dharma realm? Dharma realm is the realm where Dharma nature is all-pervasive. So, after restoring the perfect enlightenment, how can one stay in Dharma realm and not fall back out? One of the oral pith instructions and an important point is all-pervasive. That is, if you're unable to visualize all-pervasive, then you would not be able to stay in Dharma realm. Therefore, you must remember that because it is the state of oneness. If it is the state of oneness, then it should be all-pervasive. So, we have to visualize that our intrinsic nature is all-pervasive, and that means initiating the program of entering the Dharma realm, which is the 3 visualization, and you should do all, not missing any one of them. As such, you would definitely be able to enter the Dharma realm, and to restore your perfect enlightenment. Then, you can achieve the 5th point, absolute bodhicitta, and your crystal clarity awareness would arise. So, this is the 3rd step and is the most important one, as it enables you to visualize practice the 5th point. You must remember, our Dharmanatta, or bodhicitta, is a kind of awareness, a kind of realizing and knowing, and the state of oneness, where it should not have 2 or more thoughts. Therefore, when we enter the Dharma realm, we should know everything. All the mysteries of the universe, even where and how many raindrops have fallen. We are able to realize and know that we should not make any judgment. If you think that there are so many raindrops in this place, then would it cause flood? Would it cause many people purely to be drowned? And shall we rescue them? This is how you come up with a second thought. As such, you'll fall back to the three realms from the Dharma realm. Thus, do not make any judgment or take any actions. If you think that you may fall back to the three realms, then you would definitely fall back to the three realms. Hence, at that moment, if you manage to maintain the state of oneness, which is the eternal Dharma bliss, then you would be able to stay in the Dharma realm and attain Buddhahood. Although I am very happy and have already attained Buddhahood, but many sentient beings are still suffering painfully in the three realms. So, if you are sure that you will be able to enter the three realms and then return to the Dharma realm in the future because you have already had all the training, and have already known the program of initiation, knowing how to enter and stay, so you have already know them and are confident that this training is already very accurate. Like Buddha Sakyamuni, who have already attained Buddhahood and accurately know that there is no problem, then you can re-enter the three realms to save sentient beings. This is indeed the aspiration that you had made. And this is the important key point for you to decide whether to enter the three realms or not. As such, remember, the first visualization is all sentient beings, the second visualization is also all sentient beings, and the third visualization is all, i.e. everywhere. All three involve one in Chinese and also merge into one. By using a kind of awareness, using the state of oneness to realize and know, so that it is the state of oneness. And that is the key point. Please remember it is the state of oneness. This will be able to formally initiate the program of entering the Dharma realm. If our Bodhisattva is truly able to manifest, then when our Dharma nature reveals and we have initiated this program, then we can correspond with each other, such that we would truly be able to enter the Dharma realm. Remember the two important points to melt or dissolve and merge or blend into. Both are important points. If you're unable to dissolve and blend into, in fact, you are not able to enter the state of oneness, and this is the point you should remember. Indeed, this visualization method is a kind of visualization practice that practice all from the first to the fifth at once. And the first to the fifth step all has already been visualized. What if I don't know this visualization method? Like those who practice exoteric Buddhism, they're not fond of visualization. What would happen? It will take the time, 3 great Asamkhya kalpas for them to practice. This is miserable. It means forever and you'll never become a Buddha. You may not even reach the Buddha's pure land. That is to say, we should start this visualization training now. Of course, you now have to start training yourself gradually. Practice these 3 steps of visualization each time you wake up from sleep. To this before you get up. You have to start training yourselves these 3 levels of visualization. An initiation program of entering the Dharma realm. What is the benefit of this Dharma practice? It can shorten the time of 3 great Asamkhya kalpas to half Asamkhya kalpa. You can then bring about your own awareness to enable you to practice emptiness, neither existence nor voidness, in order to enter the Dharma realm. So, it will take half Asamkhya kalpa for you to practice. Why? Because there is a lack of the voice, which is the voice of the Guru to lead the detailed visualization. There are lots of details missing and there is also no protection. When the protection is weak, it'll then need half Asamkhya kalpa. You also have to comprehend and practice what I say now slowly, until the arising of your own wisdom to succeed. But it'll take half Asimhaya Kalpa to store up sufficient wisdom, but now the wisdom I've taught you has already helped you shorten 2.5 Asimhaya Kalpa, a lot of time already. If you rely only on reading Buddhist sutras, Heart Sutra, practicing a common ritual and getting many empowerments, then would you get to know a few key points of the initiation program of entering the Dharma realm? Even just for one point, it would already cost you 1 Asimhaya Kalpa to think. But you may still not be able to figure it out. So, if someone can explain to you in detail, you should cherish it. You should really try to practice it. If not, you won't succeed in your Dharma practice, as if returning from a treasure mountain empty-handed. This practice method can quickly help a large number of sentient beings and shorten their time of wandering around the 3 realms. In fact, a lot of sentient beings are suffering constantly from deaths and rebirths in the 3 realms, no way to get out, as they don't even know that they could liberate from the cycle of karmic existence, not to mention teaching them how to liberate from the cycle of karmic existence. They are trapped here innocently and unable to get out forever. So, if you now have an opportunity to know this method, you must cherish it. If you have an authentic guru using the voice to lead you through the 3 levels of visualization, coupled with training in the other 2 periods, then the quickest result you can achieve is that you would be able to attain Buddhahood in this life. It depends, however, on the trust between the guru and the disciple, as well as the implication of the powerful aid. How to provide an aid has been explained earlier. It takes mutual trust, as well as keeping this samaya by the guru and the disciple. This belongs to the relationship of causes and effects of the commitment. It'll succeed if all can be done. But if only one party fails to keep it up, then it will fail. There are too many fake gurus and improper gurus, Dharma masters around. When you read the newspaper, you will see the news of some senior monks messing around with nuns, and fake gurus such as the Sogyal scandal that causing a great stir in the world. When you hear constantly the news of improper and fake gurus, Dharma masters, then it may affect your own confidence. But you have to understand that there's an evil member of the herd and there is a black sheep in every flock. We must not let the small amount of lion bug to affect our mind to determine it to practice Dharma. We stand out for this Dharma practice today. Why we do this? We risk offending other people to disseminate this Dharma practice publicly and explain such large amount of principles to you. The purpose is to save a large quantity of sentient beings, of which a group of them insist firmly on chanting Buddha's names. In fact, what does the title of the Sutra of Visualization of the Buddha of Infinite Life come from? What does the first character of the title, in Chinese Guan, i.e. visually Satian, mean? The whole sutra teaches you how to visualize. It's one of the 3 sutras of the Pure Land school. A very important one. To put it bluntly, it requires visualization. But what is the consequence of not practicing visualization? It will take the time of 3 great Asimhaya Kalpas to practice. However, they say no. It's easier if I don't need to learn anything. What a hassle to visualize, and there are 3 steps too. We also need to find an authentic guru. What happens if we've found a fake one? I'd rather keep it simple. The simpler the better, only chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha. That should work, and that's the best. It's easy. It's better to be simple and easy. I wish that could work, too. Then, I don't need to be a guru, but just chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha, such that there is no need for me to work that hard to teach. The Lord Buddha Shakyamuni would also not have to work so hard to preach Dharma for 49 years. In fact, it's not that simple. People are misled to believe that it's that simple and the success rate is very high. But, in fact, the success rate is extremely low. Let me tell you this. According to A General History of the Buddhas, Volume 28, where it includes a special category of rebirths of the villains from the Tang dynasty, which recorded a collection of stories of those who practiced Dharma by chanting Buddha's names. On the positive side, this story tells us that it helped a person in Chang'an. There was a person named Jing who made a living by slaughtering poultry. This man was good at killing livestock. Because of the persuasion of Master Shan Dao, he took a refuge with the Pure Land School and practiced chanting Buddha's names. On the negative side, while Master Shan Dao encouraged people to chant Buddha's names, he exaggerated the successful rate and also exaggerated how wonderful a Western Pure Land of Great Bliss was and how easy people could get there. So many people wanted to go there early and therefore committed suicide at that time. For example, there are many nuns in Jinghua provinces who committed suicide according to the Tales of Rebirth. Revised and updated. How did they commit suicide? There were some elderly people, too old to eat and always ill. They listened to Master Shan Dao and realized that they could get to a Western Pure Land of Great Bliss easily by simply chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha under any circumstances. As a result, many of them committed suicide, some dived to death in the deep spring, some drowning themselves in the river. Some jumped and died because of their old age. Some younger people also killed themselves as long as they were able to get to the Buddha Amitabha's Pure Land. It didn't matter. Some died from drowning in the river. And some died from jumping from the tree. Some burned themselves as offerings. They thought that, I chant Namo Amitabha Buddha before I die, and by burning myself to make an offering to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And that would be a great merit. As a result, there were many people who sacrificed themselves as offerings just by counting those who burned themselves, and there were already more than 100 people. How horrific when you think about it, all because listening to this Master Shan Dao. It is indeed harming peoples by saying, you will definitely get there by chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha. As such, many were killed, as there were many who wanted to go to the Pure Land. And in order to reach the level without any disturbance of thoughts, they even abandoned their wives and devoted themselves to continuously chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha. Some recited the Amitabha Sutra 100,000 to 300,000 times, some chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha daily for 15,000 to 100,000 times. And some practiced a meditative concentration called Samadhi in recollection of the Buddha. They hoped that they would arrive at the Pure Land. There were countless people doing so. There were just so many of them. Well, for this case, actually, why it could make a lot of people death. What are the rare sons? You can read the article, The Meaning of Near-Death Experiences, in Lake of Lotus, issue 22, which is available on our website. According to an article in the Anabiosis Journal of Near-Death Studies by Carl Becker, a professor at Kyoto University in Japan, Master Shan Dao from the Tang dynasty was a fanatical preacher. The Pure Land described by Master Shan Dao was so vivid and appealing. At least a person from the audience committed suicide a few days after listening to his lecture due to the belief that it's a shortcut to the Pure Land by only chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha. What was the purpose of suicide? It's to get to such an attractive Pure Land early. The success was guaranteed if the methods of the Pure Land school of Buddhism were followed. They thought that the sutras do not mention those who commit suicide cannot go there, and so those who commit suicide can go there. Even the villains can go, so why those who commit suicide can't? Indeed, they distorted the truth and made a deliberate misinterpretation out of the context. Visualization is the main focus for the entire Sutra of Visualization of the Buddha of Infinite Life, which contains the 16 visualization on Buddha Amitabha that teaches 16 methods of visualization to make it easier for sentient beings to get to the Pure Land. If one can succeed easily by just chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha and can go to the Pure Land, then there is no need to teach visualization. If chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha is already able to enable one to go there, then why you are required to visualize? Because it will make it easier for you to get to the Pure Land. The title of the sutra already indicates the need to visualize, that is, the Sutra of Visualization of the Buddha of Infinite Life. What about chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha? To be successful, one has to recite Namo Amitabha Buddha to the extent without any disturbance of thoughts in his mind, without inversion. And you have to achieve and keep such level of concentration for 1 day to 7 days, so it must be a very high level of concentration, where you have to reach the level without any disturbance of thoughts. If you can do these, then you can go to the Pure Land. But most people cannot achieve such a level. So, if you tell them, by just chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha a few times, they can go to the Pure Land, then you are really deceiving them. Sadly, many people believed so and went to kill themselves. And this is the harm of misleading and exaggeration. The origin of the Pure Land school is in Song dynasty. Master Shandao was claimed to be the second patriarch of the Pure Land school. But in fact, he was the founder of Pure Land School. During year 400, the Pure Land School was propagated in Japan. What did the practitioners do in Japan? There are many young monks who were ordered to stay beside dying monks and asked them what they saw. When they were about to die, some monks were asked what they saw. The reason for asking these monks is that they had read so many Buddhist sutras and recited so many times of Namo Amitabha Buddha, so they were supposed to see Amitabha Buddha coming to take them, but not supposed to see any bad scenes. Thus they were asked to tell the truth, no point lying. The young monks were arranged to stay beside them, asked constantly what they saw, and wrote down what they said with dates and times. Every few hours they would ask them what they saw. By doing so, they hoped that they could prove that if one recites Namo Amitabha Buddha, then one is certainly go to the Buddha's Pure Land. Until the 11th century, there had been more than 100 such records being documented. The dying scenes discovered, some were good, some were bad. Some said they saw the hell. It's surprising that bad dying scenes turned out to be the majority. As a faithful and wise Dharma practitioner, in fact, efforts should be made to help sentient beings to enhance their practice methods, raise their spirits, and improve their practice methods. However, this is not the same as unscrupulously deceiving sentient beings, altering scriptures, exaggerating the facts and avoiding the weaknesses. Bad dying scenes turned out to be the majority. But there's no mention of the bad dying scenes, while good ones have been exaggerated. A few good cases are cited all the time. But it doesn't happen to most people, not like this. Even you as monks do not see good dying scenes, let alone ordinary people who would find it even harder. So, you should reveal the truth to people, not to lie. But they tend to cheat, making people believe it's all true. As a matter of fact, there are good dying scenes as well as bad dying scenes. What are the causes of these phenomena? You can read the article, The Meaning of Near-Death Experiences, in Lake of Lotus, issue 21, in which the dying scenes, or scenes at the moment of death, are explained in detail, exaggerating the success rate will result in people unwilling to enhance their practice methods. So, it turns out that no one is willing to learn more about the visualization methods. The 16 visualization on Buddha Amitabha taught you how to visualize. But as there is no one wanted to learn, so it got lost. Then everybody went to chant Namo Amitabha Buddha. Because of this, the Buddhist Dharma might get lost, such that it would be unable to be passed on to the next generation. In fact, this is how the 16 visualization on Buddha Amitabha got lost. This is not a good phenomenon. Indeed, it is superstitious, where everybody think that it is pretty sure that they could make it. But, in fact, it doesn't work. As a result, many people were killed, and many lost rescue, so it's miserable. So miserable, hence what should wise Dharma practitioners do? They should strengthen themselves, practice Dharma well, study Buddhist scriptures more, and explore the principle of things. Learn from these Japanese to be practical, asking young monks to write down what the dying monks saw and truly analyzing the situation, like what I'm analyzing it now step by step. The purpose is to help sentient beings practice Dharma and to propagate the true Dharma thoroughly, rather than just to focus on the survival and prosperity of a particular sect. What if I really managed to get to the Pure Land, then would I be able to succeed? I'll tell you now. In fact, would the Pure Land one day be destroyed? In Sutra of the Great Conflagration, the Lord Buddha said to bhiksus monks that the universe has 3 disasters: fire, flood and wind, which will burn down the entire 3,000 major chiliocosms to none. Not only in one. This is also mentioned in several other Buddhist sutras, such as the Sutra of Cosmology, which is the 4th part of the Durgagama Sutra, where the Lord Buddha talked to bhiksus about the 3 disasters. In case of the fire disaster, how high can it reach? It's the Abhisvara, light sound heaven. What is Abhisvara? It's located in the second jhana heaven of the realm of form. We're part of the 3 realm. We are in the realm of desire, a realm full of desires. Then there is the realm of heavens, with a relatively less dense structure. The higher level realm of heavens is called the realm of form, with relatively less dense structure. There are 4 jhana heavens in the realm of form. What are they? You very often hear people say if you meditate well you can make it to the 2nd jhana, entering the 2nd jhana heaven, to the 3rd jhana, then entering the 3rd jhana heaven. It's divided in such way. The 2nd jhana heaven is subdivided into 3 heavens. The highest one is called the Abhisvara, which is quite high. You understand, many people meditate in a cave for decades and cannot reach the 2nd jhana. So, it's great if you can manage to get to the Abhisvara, which is very high. But when the Pure Land explodes as a result of the 3 disasters, the Pure Land will be no more if the fire reaches the Abhisvara, and if the Pure Land is in the Abhisvara. In fact, the Pure Land can exist across low and high level of the realm of heavens. If your concentration powers are insufficient, only chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha a few times, needless to say, you would be reborn in a Pure Land that located in the lower level realm of heavens. It's for sure that you will be burned. The fire definitely covers there. Where would the flood disaster get to? It will reach Sabhavsana, universal purity heaven, the 3rd jhana heaven of the realm of form. It will burn you if you are there. If the wind disaster occurs, it will reach the Pratfala, broad fruition heaven, a lower level of the 4th jhana heaven. You will still get burned if you are there. You will realize that no matter where your Pure Land is, be it the Abhisvara, Subhaksana, or Pratfala, how high it is, you'll get burned as soon as the universe explodes. So, what it is? If it's explained scientifically, this is the reason for the destruction of the universe. The fire disaster refers to the energy that will rush up to the highest place of the second jhana heaven and destroy it. The fire disaster refers to the Big Bang of the whole universe. What is the flood disaster? After the explosion, fragments and magnetic airflows will be formed like torrents rushing up to the third jhana heaven. Well, what does it mean by a wind disaster? It refers to the pressure generates the air currents and windstorms, and more explosion. It's very strong and can rush up to the fourth jhana heaven. Thus, it is indeed quite terrible. For detailed explanation, you can read the article, The Meaning of Near-Death Experiences in the Lake of Lotus, issue 18. Well, let's see now. In fact, where are we now? Actually, we are now in the realm of desire. There is 6 heavens of desire in the realm of desire. In fact, there are heavens in our realm of desire. It is called the 6 heavens of desire, which is above us and is a lower level heaven. What's the realm of form? It is a high level heaven with relatively less dense structure. What is formless realm? It's a realm where there is no substance, only consciousness. So, it's called the formless realm. If you practice emptiness to a level where there's nothing at all. After reading the Heart Sutra thinking that everything should be emptied, and also unable to bring out the realizing and knowing, then you will be trapped in the formless realm, and can't get out. Then, it would also be very miserable. Furthermore, what are the 9 lands? What are the 3 realms and the 9 lands? The 9 lands are the 9 kinds of places to live. This is called the 9 lands. Well, let's not make it so complicated, only talk about the realm of desire and the realm of form. In fact, there are 28 heavens in the 3 realms. The 6 heavens of desire are low-level heavens, while the heavens in the realm of form and the formless realm we talk now are high-level heavens. Then, where is the Pure Land, where we preach it very hard and the practitioner practice for their entire life to try to get there? Actually, most of the Pure Lands are in the lower levels of the 6 heavens of desire, and therefore will certainly be eliminated in case of the 3 disasters. So, how serious it is if you don't aim high when practicing Dharma, you may ask. They're high-level Pure Lands. There are, of course. They are in the heaven of form realm. But how can you get to the high-level Pure Lands if you're just chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha? You have to remember that everything is impermanent, said Buddha Sakyamuni. Based on the law of impermanence, the Pure Lands will disappear when the 3 disasters appear. So, how do you think we should do? You would not be affected unless you could get to the 5 heavens of not returning, the highest 5 heavens of the heaven of form realm. For the 18 heavens within the heaven of form realm, the highest 5 is called 5 heavens of not returning, which is the 5 highest heavens. If you manage to get there, it means that you've liberated from the cycle of karmic existence. And you'll never come back down again. And the 3 disasters, fire, flood and wind, will never harm you. Well, in fact, what is the best? It's to enter the Dharma realm and become a Buddha. It's the most ultimate. It's still not the most ultimate to get to the 5 heavens of not returning. As you're still in the 3 realms, what is the most ultimate? It's to enter the Dharma realm and attain Buddhahood, the greatest ability. You may say that once you've arrived in the 5 heavens of not returning, you'll have no fear as you've liberated from the cycle of karmic existence. But in case you still think of something, some distraction, then you go out. However, once you go out, you may not be able to go back to the 5 heavens of not returning again, such that you will continue to be reborn in the cycle of karmic existence, but it will be different if you enter the Dharma realm and become a Buddha, restoring the perfect enlightenment. the 100% awareness with no deviation. Then you would know how to get back to the Dharma realm, and also know how to go to the 5 heavens of not returning. You will have no fear to get back to the Dharma realm after going into the 3 realms to save sentient beings. Therefore, everyone says that the whole point of the Dharma practice is to liberate from the cycle of karmic existence or to enter the Dharma realm to become a Buddha. Instead of going to the Pure Land, which is a much lower level of accomplishment, you may say, so what is the difference between us and other religions? Practicing other religions will only enable you to get to the 6 heavens of desire. Very, very few get to the 5 heaven of not returning. None has entered the Dharma realm, because they don't know the emptiness, such that they won't be able to enter the Dharma realm and become a Buddha. So, this is the reason why Buddhism is the religion that is the highest, the most ultimate, and teaches us how to practice Dharma. And that is the reason. Therefore, you shouldn't mislead sentient beings. Dharma masters and anyone who preaches Dharma should explain this clearly to sentient beings. Stop deceiving and misleading sentient beings because of different sector schools. Pure lands are not eternal. You shouldn't deceive sentient beings into believing that they're eternal and very easy to go there. In fact, the success rate is very low. You have to know how to visualize, like what has been taught in the Sutra of Visualization of the Buddha of Infinite Life, in order to succeed. So, we teach this practice method today. Not only for those sentient beings who do not visualize, but also for those who practice incorrectly. They have practiced wrongly because of something. For example, they practice wrongly because they have been taught to practice Tonglen. There are also some sentient beings with deviated minds, who think mostly of empowerments due to their strong greed, hatred and ignorance, and also thinking of practicing the God of Wealth method. So, I teach for these sentient beings with deviated minds. Nowadays, most exoteric Buddhism practitioners neglect the idea of practicing by visualizing, that is, understanding all things come from the mind so as to use the mind's strength to visualize practice. They neglect it all. They also overlook the method of Guided program training. They do not know how to initiate the program of the Dharma realm. On the other hand, most esoteric Buddhism practitioners neglect the purification of their mental consciousness, focusing only on empowerments and the visualization program training. And they are extremely superstitious with no ability to analyze. Hence there is the Sogil scandal. What is the Sogil scandal? We have mentioned it at the last session. A large quantity of sentient beings suffered as they believed in Sogil. It is because they are extremely superstitious, so they have not analyzed it, such that they allowed this Sogil to deceive and abuse them for more than 30 years, and they still did not leave him. It is all because of superstition. Tonglen is an unbalanced practice method. It is a mistake that you've gone to practice it without analyzing it. Therefore, most disciples only know, but don't distinguish the truth from the false. In short, they pay no attention to analyze whether the guru is authentic or fake. They think the guru is always right. Indeed, this is the biggest drawback of practicing esoteric Buddhism, as the practitioners do not have analytical ability and the capability of realizing and knowing, but they assume what the guru say is right. In fact, they don't even know how to distinguish whether the guru is authentic or fake. But they assume that for all guru said is right. In this way, many people will be harmed. Similarly, it is also a kind of deviation and unbalanced in practice, known as two perplexity of views and thoughts. What are the two perplexity of views and thoughts? If the view is wrongly interpreted, saying gurus are always right, but not to analyze, then it is already wrong in the views, thoughts, that the thinking and thought is already wrong. When you say, in esoteric Buddhism, one should listen to what gurus say, otherwise one would fall into hell, which is a very serious matter. Indeed, should we listen to the guru, such that even he says the sun rises in the west and the disciple should say this is right? How do we deal with a matter like this? What do we do so we don't violate the precept? Will it prevent us from thinking independently? You can watch the video lecture with title of Will the Trust and Obedience to the Dharma Master Hinder Independent Thinking? The 50 Stanzas of Guru Devotion 8, available on the Dajjal Buddhist Association's TV channel on YouTube. This time that this practice method is taught is because some people are not willing to take refuge from a strict guru. There has been a person who wanted to take refuge from us but later decided not to. His reason was that it is much harder for you to grant an empowerment, but there are lots of people who can get empowerment casually outside. So he decided not to come here to take refuge and went elsewhere because it's easier to receive empowerments. The fact that those who do not like to follow a strict master also means that they do not like to observe the precepts. So, I transmit this Dharma practice in order to save these sentient beings. There are some sentient beings who don't like being monitored and trained. Some, after taking the refuge, violate the precepts and are asked to repent, but they are unwilling to repent. So they have to be put into Brahmadana, word in Pali, which means the Sangha group would stop all conversation and communication with them. But they are still not willing to repent and rather go elsewhere to learn. But you know, there are so many fake and unqualified gurus who give empowerments in order to make profits, to attract more people and strengthen their own sects. There are very few who would spend hours teaching the Dharma and then put the teachings onto YouTube for people to learn. In order to save these people, we teach this practice method openly. And this is the reason why we work so hard to produce these videos and put them onto YouTube. These videos, as you see, often last for 1 to 2 hours. It is because Buddha Sakyamuni had taught for 49 years in order to explain the true Buddhist Dharma to sentient beings. And this is the right approach. What is wrong is giving empowerments, doing some rituals to bless you. In fact, they cannot even bless themselves, let alone you. So, don't be superstitious. Indeed, you should go to learn more true Buddhist Dharma. That's why we work so hard to produce YouTube videos. The reason is to save these sentient beings. We hope to quickly shorten their time of wandering around the 3 realms. This is the reason why we teach this Dharma practice method. The treasury of Dharma Dhatu was mentioned in the previous session, of which there are the essence of the oral pith instructions to practice the great perfection. In our red sect, there is a guru master who focused in practicing the great perfection. And he is Kunkhayan Longchen Rabjam, who compiled the treasury of Dharma Dhatu. He compiled it by collecting the oral pith instructions from the 17 Dzogchen Tantras. These are oral pitch instructions of 17 uncommon kinds of actual practice methods, where uncommon means no other have these. Here, this paragraph mentions about the oral pith instructions of visualization practice, which is the 3-step visualization practice that I taught you earlier. And you will succeed quickly if you practice with this oral pitch instruction, and it could enable you to attain Buddhahood in this life. And this is the oral pitch instruction of the visualization practice. However, I won't explain this oral pith instruction today because of the time. But I remind you that the 24 hours of a day are divided into 3 time periods. We've only explained the first period today, that is, the moment when we wake up from sleep, come out of a meditative state, suddenly change the frequency during meditation, or after we die. And at these times, how would we initiate the program of entering the Dharma realm? We must know that there are the teachings for the other two periods to follow. When will we teach them? There will be a fish releasing ceremony to be held on Sunday the 12th of November when Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara's life-releasing ritual will be taught. It's the simplest and safest ritual that enables sentient beings to do the puja for the deceased, and this is also a ritual of life releasing. You are all welcome to participate. If you come, you will be taught with this ritual. Then it's the incense offerings ceremony for the birthday of Bodhisattva Kundi on the 10th of December when the Great Perfection oral pith instructions to initiate the program of entering the Dharma realm will be further explained. I will explain how to visualize and analyze first, and I will also explain some of the oral pith instructions as much as I can. This includes, for example, the oral pith instructions of the visualization practice for Bodhisattva from the Treasury of Dharma Dhatu that I just show you will be explained. In addition, it will also compare with those oral pith instructions that being taught in the Heart Sutra, how they be explained in the Heart Sutra and how to visualize them in the Heart Sutra. It will be explained next time. You must remember to watch the video lecture from the Dudjom Buddhist Association's TV channel on YouTube. And the title is True Explanation of the Emptiness Bodhisattva, Pith Instructions on the Great Perfection, and Fallacies of the Crazy Wisdom, which is the previous lesson and is the first session of the series of the visualization practice of compassion and Bodhisattva. You should watch it. Today's lesson is the second session of the series and we will edit it and upload it onto YouTube. It will be entitled, The Visualization Practice of Initiating the Program of Entering the Dharma Realm and Attain Buddhahood. That's it for today.